Hello, it's Chloe Bruce again. I'm talking about the diagnosis of schizophrenia in Britain and how it feels to be in a mental health hospital. And all these topics were discussed in my previous podcasts. But now I'm just going to say a few words about what my actual symptoms were. I've written something down to read. Thank you. It occurred to me that my previous podcast discussions on my diagnosis of schizophrenia did not allude to my actual symptoms. I have a good long-term memory and thankfully recall all details of each episode. Owing to forensic issues, I cannot give all details, but I can say that I started off with a diagnosis of acute psychosis and not schizophrenia at that point, where my only symptom was extreme preoccupation, that is, preoccupation in your thoughts when you go over and over the same thoughts. Indeed, I was so preoccupied by my thinking that I could not tie my shoelaces readily. The antipsychotic drug I was prescribed did work, but for fertility reasons, that is to do with trying to conceive. I tried coming off this drug. I wasn't necessarily actively trying for a baby, but obviously if you're sexually active as an adult, you might have to consider what would happen to your baby were you to become accidentally pregnant. As such, I tried coming off this drug because, like many women who face these decisions, the drug itself was not necessarily safe during pregnancy. I was frightened that the drug would harm an unborn baby. And there were indeed warnings on the packaging not to get pregnant. Not a single doctor I'd seen at this point was a female doctor. They were all men. As such, I received not 1 ounce of advice on how to handle the issue of pregnancy whilst taking these medications. As such, the baby did not happen. I will return to this point a bit later in another video. But having come off these drugs for these reasons, I relapsed. And it took a few months before I relapsed, but I did come off my medication and relapse at that point. But on this occasion, in psychosis, I had more obvious symptoms of schizophrenia, namely having voices and a type of hallucination that has since been clarified as a mental image rather than a hallucination by one of the better psychiatrists I have seen. I was so frightened of poisons at this point that I could not eat or drink anything. I would hear voices saying simultaneously, "Drink the water," in one of my ears, and in the other ear, "Don't drink the water." I favoured the latter voice and suffered of extreme thirst as a result. I was truly suffering at this point. One of my mental images was a knife flying across the room. I saw this as a sign I was in extreme danger from my then psychiatrist. I was too frightened not to admit myself to hospital, so I went involuntarily. In retrospect, I feel my suffering and certain symptoms were also part of my myoclonic epileptic syndrome, which was diagnosed later by some overseas specialists. This was not diagnosed in Britain, this generalised epilepsy. At a more practical level, at that time, I was terrified of becoming unemployed and my inability to have a child owing to the inimical nature of some of the drugs. I was so frightened of this inability to have a child that I actually vomited. Thankfully, depression has not been a particular feature of my condition, although I have been prescribed antidepressants at times. Although I'm a Russian specialist, a specialist that is in the Russian Federation, the political life of the Russian Federation and that region, my condition did not particularly make me paranoid about Russia itself, contrary to what people might think, but I was actually worried that medical staff and others, especially in Britain, had been paid off by the man who sexually assaulted me. And they were paid, I thought, in these psychotic episodes to make out that I was some kind of liar or flirt, as it was all my fault that I'd been sexually assaulted. This particular set of ideas may have been triggered by certain people at work who had accused me of flirting with them, when in fact I had done my absolute best to put off one particular member of staff from inviting me out all the time and simply not ever taking no for the answer. The voices I hear now tell me that this may have been a vain attempt by this particular man to oust me from my then job by sexualising me in the office. It's not at all flattering. They literally just don't want the woman to have the job. He even pursued me to my next job, writing me emails that I couldn't cope with. I can guarantee I did not flirt with anyone in any of my offices. Today, the voices I hear are very positive. Indeed, I just want to clarify that I do still have voices. And but these are very positive now, never negative, and it's a bit like a CBT specialist keeping in permanent contact with me. I have never been offered any therapy in Britain for the traumas I've experienced, but I did, when I was 20 years of age, I did pay somewhat, and this was some years before getting ill, about 6 years before I became psychotic. I paid a psychoanalyst for treatment, and I had this for a few months, and it was very successful. The analyst was superb and helped me get through my degree, my BA honours, that is, successfully. Psychoanalysis is Freudian analysis, and it was Sigmund Freud, Sigmund Freud was the father of psychoanalysis, that is, the inventor of the whole psychoanalytical concept. And also he was a renowned neurologist, a scientist as such, an extremely brilliant scientist, who moved society away from literally beating the insane to rid them of demons towards an approach that addressed the root causes of illness, such as the sexual abuse of children. I love Freud with all my heart. People with schizophrenia do not necessarily spend their life rejecting people. I have met lots of wonderful people in my lifetime, really exceptionally kind, talented, wonderful people. But I simply cannot abide a lack of expertise when it comes to a professional context. It has taken decades, but now, at this point in my life, I feel I have a clear understanding of where all these psychotic ideas have come from in terms of various life traumas and other issues. There is no gene that makes you a rape victim, but somebody already vulnerable as such may apparently be more likely to be abused again. That is, if you've been sexually abused once or sexually assaulted once, you're more at risk statistically of having a further assault against you. Psychoanalysis is not there to create the perfect person. I don't think Freud would ever have said anyone had to be perfect. It is there actually to improve quality of life. Today I have a good quality of life, but I am aware that this has a lot to do with my now being more or less seizure-free, and my epilepsy as such is in remission. I would like to just finally point out that these co-occurring additions, like epilepsy, do pose a problem for people with a psychosis, and it might be better to talk about a syndrome as such when somebody becomes psychotic. Thank you.